Hey guys, welcome to another video on my channel on Buckman's Model Mania. This afternoon, or actually this evening now, what I'm going to do is show you how to wire or how to solder a flasher board. This is an older board. I've had it for several years, and I actually did this video earlier today, but had some issues, and so I have to redo it. Biggest issue was the video had no sound. So this board comes with two of each, a potentiometer, if I can get it to stand up. Comes with two potentiometers, two capacitors, two transistors, two LEDs, and where I screwed it up earlier today, I didn't realize that it was 1,000 ohm and 10,000 ohm resistors, because it's very important. The 1,000 ohms go for our R1, R2, R3, and R4 are 10,000 ohms. Didn't realize that until I found the instructions after I built it, and it just was really dim. So you can search online to see what the lines on the LED mean, because each one of the lines is a position or a multiplier. So like this one here, and you start on the line that is on the up on the bump of the resistor. This one here looks like it is brown, black, orange, which according to my key, brown, the first digit would be 1, the second digit being black would be 0. The third digit, since there's only 3 lines on here, is a multiplier, and orange would be 1,000. So this will be a 10,000 ohm resistor. This one here is the same thing. It's brown, black, orange, so that's a 10,000 ohm resistor, which means these two being, oops, let me turn it around, being brown, black, red. The only difference being red, it's still 1, 0, but the multiplier is now 100, which makes these 1,000 watt or 1,000 ohm resistors. So let me put these over here. Let me go and quickly get a piece of wire so that I can put power to this. And the wire, you don't have to do the wire like I am right here. You can use anything. You can use magnet wire, whatever wire you happen to be wiring your project with. I just like to use this heavier duty wire here when I'm putting power to a board. So what you do is you strip the wire. Oops, didn't grab. It's not grabbing good. You strip the wire, and this is one of my favorite wire strippers I've ever had, because it just pulls the wires, the phenolic, right off. I'm going to twist the wire here, twist both sides. I could do what's known as tinning. I'm not going to, because this wire is eventually going to be soldered to something else. And if you can see, things you can see here on the board is it's got black and red, red being positive, red is always positive, LD2, LD1. LD stands for LED, and the flat side of the LED, let me double check, should be red, positive. The flat side denotes the negative side of the LED, or the shorter leg on the LED. RV1 and RV2 are the potentiometers. One thing to note here is that you could have a smaller potentiometer than this one, and the 3 legs would go like that. These are the 3 legs go 1, 2, 3 here. And then you've got R1, R2, which are the 1,000 ohm resistors, R3, R4, which are the 10,000 ohm resistors. The capacitors go here for C1 and C2, and then the transistors go on T1 and T2. Really a pretty simple board to build. One thing to remember is your parts go on this side, you solder on this side. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the red and black wire so I can put power to the project once it's done. And you simply feed the wire through the holes. Red one through the red, black one through the black. Push them as close to flush to the surface of the board as you can. Turn the board over and then grab it with your helping hands. Hopefully the wire will stay in place, because that is the one thing about having to turn it over like that, is the parts can fall out of the board when you do that. What I tend to do is bend the legs of the parts out just a little bit so that they'll hold on in the board while I'm soldering it. And I use a lead-free solder, and it's really, really thin. It heats really well with the soldering iron. Matter of fact, let me see if I can get it to tin. It's lead-free, and it has a 2% flux core, which means the flux that I'm not using is already in the solder itself. What I'm trying to do right now is get the solder to melt on the tip so I can tin it, because once it's tinned, when it's shiny like it is up here, this is actually the business end down here, but if it's shiny like it is up there, then what happens is the heat flows a little bit better through. Well, I've got the soldering iron set to 770 degrees, and it has to actually get all the way down to the end. It's the core inside is what the soldering iron is measuring. That didn't tin very well. Let me try that again. And 770 is a little bit higher than you have to. Most of the soldering I've seen has been done at 750. I like going a little bit higher because it melts the solder a little bit easier. So I'm going to just touch the solder here, and what I'm trying to do is heat the pad instead of the solder. You can see that the solder is now grabbing hold. It's not a good solder joint yet. It should be all the way across the pad. There's a good solder joint, and the red wire will not come off the board anymore. And then do the same thing with the black wire. Once you have a good solder join, you can tell when you look at it from the side, the solder is actually holding the wire in. What you can do then is take your sprue cutters, nippers, something, and just cut it off, because you've got a lot of excess wire sitting there. So now you've got a much better looking connection there. And it's not sticking way out where it's going to touch a piece of metal and short out. So the next parts that go on are going to be the potentiometers. Actually, I think RV stands for resistor variable. It's pretty much the same thing as a potentiometer. And what I'm doing here is I'm bending the legs just a hair, because with the length of the legs that as they come, they'll go through the board, and they will be as short as you need them. I'm not going to cut them off after I'm done. So let me go ahead and put this other one in here and do the same thing. And The reason I'm bending it is so that it holds while before I do the soldering, otherwise it will just fall off. Okay, and those are in place now. Let me bring this up just a hair. Let me see. I'm just making sure that I've got a good spot where I'm doing my soldering, because it would really be worthless if I was soldering off screen. And so I'm going to just do the same thing I did before, trying to get just a little mound of solder around the leg. And do that on all 6 legs. You can see 2 of these legs on each of them actually do not connect to anything. I could just leave it like this, but I'm going to go ahead and, for uniformity's sake, go ahead and solder the rest of it. What these variable resistors are going to do is going to give me the opportunity, it's going to set it up to where the LEDs, I can set a specific flash rate for each LED. So let me double check. And another way to check and make sure you're wiring your LED correctly, the long leg goes to red, you flip it over, this is the red wire, comes around here, this is still the red wire here, which means this is the black wire, which is the negative, and the red comes around here all the way to the other side. So the red, or longer legs, positive lead, however you want to put it, belong on the inside. And I'm going to leave these out just a hair, pulled out from the board just a hair, because these are not going to stay. Eventually I'm going to replace them with a different circuit, because what I'm initially using this one for is to light some flasher lights on a model I'm working on. I'm working on the 577th USS Voyager, and this is, to me, this is an easier way to light 6 flashing lights rather than trying to figure out a whole Arduino circuit. And so these are just the same way. Let me put it back in there. So now we're back in helping hands, and I will just go across and put a dab of solder on each pad, making sure that I don't have the solder cross between the pads. Like right there, you can see there's a very small gap. If you don't have the gap, you end up shorting it out and nothing works. I love the way this solder, when it goes from hot to cool enough to when it solidifies, it just glazes over. Went from shiny, oops, that one's a little bit long, let me go from this way. Went from shiny to dull just like that. And I clipped this one a little bit long, so let me reclip it. And the key thing is, especially when you don't have a set of instructions, which I do, I'm actually surprised I have these still, but when you don't have a set of instructions, you look at what the shapes are. For resistor 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this, earlier it screwed me up because I didn't realize that it was a 10,000 and a 1,000 ohm resistors, so I wired it exactly backwards. Nothing, it worked, but the lights were really, really dim. So resistors 3 and 4 are the 10,000 ohm resistors, and they're in the center there. I'm just going to double check that I've got the right ones. So this is brown, black, orange. These two have red, so this is the 10,000 ohm ones. And what you want to do is you want to make a little bit like a U with your resistors. And then you push the legs of the U through the holes in the board at the that show for the end of the resistor. So like that. Let's see if pull it down, and the wire is on the resistor is really flexible, so it will let you position it pretty well. It's on there like that, and I'm going to bend the legs out a little bit underneath so that they will it will hold when I turn it over. And then do the same thing with this one. Two holes. The fact that the resistors are not exactly centered doesn't matter. You just have to make sure that they are held in and the wire goes through the hole correctly. So now turn that over, put it back in here, and what I'm going to do is once I get a fairly good solder joint on one or the other, I'm going to actually push up on it at the same time. So I'm going to put solder instead on, see if I can get it on the iron like that, so I can push up on the bottom of one of the resistors and put the solder on the pad like that, making sure that the resistor is as close to the board as I can. Let me clean it off. Do the other side. There, that's a good joint there. There's a little bit of finesse to soldering. And if you get a little point like that one has, as long as it doesn't make contact with any other part of the circuit, you should be just fine. Okay, and same thing as before, clipping the leads off. It's actually a little bit warm. That's the thing, is remember when you're soldering that you're working with hundreds of degrees of temperature, so you want to be really careful. Now, on the capacitors, you can see that there's one leg that's longer than the other, just like there is on an LED. There's a plus on each of the spots where the capacitors go, so the plus is where the longer leg goes. You just slide it down there. I always push it down as far as I can get it, because I want my circuit to be, or my board to be, have all the parts as close as possible. And you can see this one slipped down a little bit, which will be fine. Then flip it over. Clean the soldering iron, which, in case you can't see, I'm cleaning it in brass. What the brass does is it pulls the solder. The solder has a better affinity for the brass than it does for the soldering iron, so it'll pull the solder in there. That's the only thing, that or a wet sponge. You never want to clean your soldering iron, the tip of your soldering iron with anything other than that. It will make your soldering iron wear out a lot faster if you do, and it'll start looking like this one. And you'll get what's known as bluing on the metal of the solder tip itself. I like the pointy ones like this. It's just I don't have any others. I also have some stuff that will let me retin that at some point. So back to the capacitors, and you want to make sure you avoid putting too much heat on the board for a long time, because you can actually burn out the component without putting a single any electricity at all through it. There's that one. That one. That one. And that one. And you can see there's a slight gap between all of those. That small gap, it doesn't matter that it's that small, simply because we're dealing with, at most, this is a 9-volt board, but usually with boards like this, you're dealing with at most 12 volts. Clip those off. And I can feel the capacitors are a little bit warm from the soldering process, but they're not too bad. And that's what they look like on the other side. So I've got 4 spots left open, R1 and R2, which are the 2 resistors, and then transistor 1 and transistor 2. So I'll go ahead and put the 2 resistors in there. And do like I did before, which is I tend to pull my resistor down, not just feed it all the way down, because it pulls it, when I pull it, it pulls it tight. I can then, like I said before, bend the legs a little bit so that it will not fall out when I'm soldering it. Do the same thing with R2. And I just noticed you see the holes in the corners. Those holes actually do not touch any of the electrical circuit. This one here, and this one here. That gives you the opportunity to put a screw through the board to hold it down wherever you're going to install it. And then do the same thing with this resistor. Flip it back over. If you're planning on doing soldering, I didn't think about it when a friend of mine got his stuff. I forgot to tell him to get helping hands. They are a necessity, because you cannot hold on to something you're soldering. You will burn your hand, 2nd or 3rd degree burns, and life will just suck at that point. Okay. There's 1, 2, come on, 3, and 4. And I don't know if you noticed, but when the iron is at a good temperature, once the solder starts to, or you touch it to the solder, the solder flows almost instantly. Okay, 2 last parts, the transistors. And with the transistors, you can see on the board, there's a flat spot on the marking on the board. That means the flat spot on the transistor is what goes to that flat side. So since the middle leg is away from the flat side, you just take the middle leg and bend it a hair away from the other 2, or bend the other. There we go. Because you're going to end up with kind of like a tripod, like that. That one's down out a little bit further. far. So you take this and you just have to feed the legs through the 3 holes. What I find is that if I put the 2 legs in first, I can then push the 3rd leg over into the hole. And this one, instead of pulling, I'm going to push it down because I want to get it as close as I can to the board. And then I'm going to bend these legs just a hair apart so that they'll hold it. We do the same thing with this one. Okay, put 2 legs in. And the 3rd leg in. They stick down through the bottom. I'm going to turn it the other way this time, put the legs towards me, or the transistors towards me, so that I can get at them a little bit better with the solder. And 1, 2, 3. And truthfully, what you're trying to do is heat the pad, not the wire or the solder. I tend to heat up the solder, and then it'll sink down onto the pad like that. I love the way it goes from shiny to dull. One thing I just did, I was about that far from the soldering iron. I could feel the heat coming up through the solder. I was getting a little bit close to the soldering iron and endangering my fingers. So soldering iron can be turned off, and we'll flip this thing over. And if everything worked right, before I almost forgot to cut the legs off. If everything has worked the way it should, if I've done my soldering right and I haven't overheated any components, this flasher board should be good to go. The one thing I did do that sometimes instead of having the wires come out of the top, I'll have them come out of the bottom instead. Okay, so let me put power to it. And one of the things I always do is I never turn on my power supply at the voltage. I always turn it up from 0. So bring it up. That is 9 volts operating voltage. Turn this off so it's a little bit better to see. And what you can do, what these variable resistors do for you, is you can sit here and you can rotate it down to, this one is just flashing momentarily and this one's on longer. Or you can make it really long pause, very slow, or if you do both, it looks like that. It starts to look like a light bar on a cop car. What I'm doing for the Voyager is something about like that, except about like that, but I want to say the pause is a little bit less. And instead of having the LED here, I've got a wire gonna have a, or let me bring over the board I built earlier, which I put the 10,000 ohm and the 1,000 ohm resistors in the wrong spot, so it didn't work. I had to rework it using a thing called a solder sucker. Very, very important tool if you're trying to rewire something. What you do is heat up the solder, your solder joint. You put this up against the solder joint with the soldering iron still there. Push the button, and what it does is it'll pull a lot of the solder out of the way. So let me get the other board here, along with the fantail from the Voyager. First, I'm going to show you the flashing sequence I have for the board, or I'm going to show, you're going to see the flashing sequence on the red. So I've got a pretty good pause there. The white is actually got fiber optic coming out of it, and you can see that it looks like the flashers should, these will get cut down to the base, and that'll, in my mind, that will be the perfect flashing rate for Voyager. What I'm gonna do, and you can see I've got wires running in here too. And what my plan is to jumper off of this wire, these two wires here, do two more setups here like this, one for the nose lights and the belly and the light on top of the bridge. That way they're all in timing or timed together the way they should be. So that's how to build a pre-wired or a DIY circuit board that you buy off eBay, Amazon, what have you. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it helps you, because I've been building these for years. Haven't built any for a long time, but I've got a huge stock of them because you never know what I'm going to want. So with that, I'm going to call it a video and catch you on the flip side.